Welcome to Threads of Sustainability, where you get to hear the passionate, informative, and engaging conversations of creatives, makers, manufacturers, and producers from all over the globe. We explore what sustainability can look like in the quilting, fiber, and textile world, and I'm your host, Bridget O'Flaherty, also known as the Sustainable Quilter. Hey there, listeners. This is Bridget O'Flaherty, and this week I am talking with Winona from the Green Matters Natural Dye Company. And they are a company that uses plant-based materials to eliminate the harmful dyes that are used in the commercial processing of materials and looking to provide a safe and eco-friendly alternative. They're constantly researching, experimenting, innovating to find new technologies and techniques, and they're looking at trying to increase the viability of natural dyeing. They've been in operation since 2015, and they've built an extensive body of knowledge. They're amazing researchers on how natural dyes work and how best to achieve the desired results using those and consistent results as well. And they work with clients to understand what's possible and what kind of variation they can expect, and have developed techniques and technology to improve that reliability and lower the costs. They've also started working with individuals to help educate as well. So they're offering workshops and learning spaces. So they're doing a lot of really amazing things. They're based out of the US, and Winona and I got into a really interesting conversation about natural dyes and the processes behind them, the challenges of having a business, a dye house in the commercial space, and what that can look like. So it was a really interesting perspective around the efforts that are being made on small scale production and trying to help folks, individuals as well, understand what's possible behind natural dyes. So yeah, super interesting conversation. I really hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to Threads of Sustainability, Winona. It's really nice to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. So tell me, let's start right into it. First of all, tell me a little bit about your business. I found you on Instagram. I love following what you're doing, but tell me about your business first and what it is you're doing in that business. And then we'll dig into some of your background and stuff.
Right. Yeah. So I am the founder and CEO of Green Matters Natural Dye Company, which is a majority business facing commercial dye service that focuses on dyeing finished garments using only plant-based dyes. And we started this with the mission that we are hoping to end or minimize the pollution that comes from the textile industry at the commercial scale. The textile industry is the second largest polluter of global waterways of all industries. So that's the short version of what we do.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's where you are right now, but let's back up and talk to me a little bit about the journey that got you to wanting to do this. Where did you start? Did you have family influence on your textiles? Why textiles? Why dyes?
it's I laugh because I've had two careers my whole life that I've been interested in. And when I was very small, when I was a toddler, I told my mom I wanted to be a marine biologist and was very interested in, waterways and the ocean. And as a teenager, I wanted to be a fashion designer. I think
Okay.
that owning a plant-based dye house is like the only thing that connects those two
That's
careers.
a good combination. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I had started a career path towards the traditional fashion designer, whether that was starting my own brand or working within an existing brand. I left entered adulthood with that being my goal to pursue that career. And I went to school at Parsons, the New School for Design, within their fashion design
So what
program.
area is that? Where is your business, first of all?
Well, I went to school in New York.
Okay.
Parsons, the New School is in New York, but my business is in Lancaster County, where I grew up.
Okay. Where's that?
Oh, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Lancaster. Okay. Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so we're Lancaster, Pennsylvania is about 2 hours south of New York City, just to
Okay.
give a geographical reference.
Okay, good.
And so I grew up here, left the small town for the big city, and while studying for my fashion design degree, I was humbled to understand that fashion was not as glamorous as I had been led to believe. And of course, nothing is as glamorous as teenagers believe it
No,
to
no.
be. But while doing internships and while learning more about how fabrics are actually made and sold to fashion houses, I began to think more about the impact it was having rather than the actual use of the fabrics and the clothing that was being made. Because I was just seeing a lot of overproduction of the same things that were tweaked slightly to account for trend. And that wasn't exciting to me, or as exciting as I thought it would be. But I was more disturbed by starting to understand what wet finishing was doing in terms of pollution.
Okay, so wait, can you define that because not everybody knows what wet finishing is?
So, wet finishing is anything from the dyeing to applying coatings to different softening or wash finishes that happen to fabrics, either in the fabric form before being cut and sewn into garments or at the garment level.
Okay.
And so that's applying the color to fabrics, that's making fabric water repellent, that is softening fabrics, that there's all of these
Okay.
different processes that go into manufacturing the fabric for our clothing, for our cars, for our homes.
And that's on like that's for all fabric materials, all types of materials.
Yeah. So pretty much anything that's knit or woven at an industrial scale is going to go through some type of wet processing, whether that's
Okay.
just washing it to remove the starches that are in the fibers while being knit or woven, or to get shrink out, or to make it a hand feel that is deemed appropriate by the consumer, or because it's performance wear and it needs to have a waterproof finish on it. All of these different parts of textile manufacturing are considered wet processing.
Okay.
And that is what contributes to water pollution, because there is, the refuse of this process is often being into global waterways in countries that don't have the regulation to prevent it from happening.
Right. Well, it either leaves on the fabric or it leaves in the water, right? It's
Exactly.
one of two ways to go.
Doesn't magically disappear. And just understanding the impact that that one step within the fashion design supply chain was having on the environment was enough for me to kind of pick at the crack in the wall.
Yeah.
And it started to inform my work as a student at Parsons, that I was starting to explore plant-based dyeing within the collections that I was designing for my schoolwork. And I think that was something that like people, my classmates would also like kind of experiment with and then move on to something else for the next project. And I
Right.
didn't, much to the
You
chagrin
stayed there. Yeah.
of my professors, who really just wanted me to learn how to make technical packets to send to factories to produce clothing. That's really what they wanted me to learn how to do. And I was like, no, I want to learn how to actually dye fabric and garments. So I spent a few years while I was a student researching plants that could be used as dye, how to grow them, the kind of like base level understanding of how to use them, where are they growing, how to grow them, can they be farmed, and exploring it on that swatching, really small scale level. At this point, I am working
Yeah.
out of a soup pot in my Manhattan kitchen.
Right.
So I'm not a dye house yet. And of course, this is when the feedback I'm getting is natural dyes aren't scalable, natural dyes aren't consistent enough. And I'm also being told, like at this stage, that I would never be paid to dye anything for someone.
Of course. Of
So
course.
I'm not the research I'm doing at this stage is not necessarily being like welcomed as a solution. And as I started to understand that I thought I wanted to pursue this as a business, I thought that we were working on a clothing line. Like I thought like this is going to be a naturally dyed clothing line. And after I left school and I was taking this concept and this research into what became the business, a mentor early on said, "Why do you want to do this? Beyond the problem you're trying to solve, what drive within you? What do you want to be doing every day?" And said, "I want to be dyeing. I really love the dyeing." And he said, "Well, if you're starting a fashion line, you're going to spend 90% of your time trying to get people to buy your clothing. And there are a lot of fashion brands, but there's not any natural dye houses. in the US. There were at that time there were no dye houses that only use plant-based dyes. So that pretty quickly pushed me in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah, you realize there's a need there.
Exactly. And I didn't really want to be selling clothing.
Right,
um,
fair. Yeah, yeah. So I want to dig back a little bit about the idea around natural dyes, because one of the things that comes up around natural dyes from conversations I have with people is they're not chemical free. And so talk to us a little bit about how that impact and the use of natural dyes in small batch dyeing, how that can be managed so that it's still not impacting waterways, and we don't have chemicals still.
well, I think when it comes to thinking about how toxic a given process is, in this case, we're talking about natural dyes. I sometimes get inquiries that say, I want a chemical free process. And the truth is that like everything is a chemical, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly, exactly.
and harmful substances are also chemicals, and harmless substances are chemicals as well. So what we have to be thinking about is this toxic to is it toxic to humans? Is it toxic to aquatic life? And if so, in what way? So, for example, I think with natural dyes, the bad rep that they get is that the mordants, which are needed for the chromophores within the plant to bond to the fiber in a way that won't wash away or fade with UV,
Hmm.
is often there's a wide variety of mordants that you can use. And pre-synthesized dye, some of the mordants that were being used for natural dye were highly toxic. So
Yeah, like
examples,
copper, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
chrome, tin can be used.
yeah,
And with mordants, there are mordants that are toxic for humans to handle, and that includes copper and chrome and tin. And there are mordants that, and you can't dispose of them safely. They're really hard to
right,
dispose of safely.
right.
There are other mordants that don't carry the same risks that the toxic mordants do. So an example of that is alum sulfate. The risk with alum sulfate is that it's a fine powder. So the human who is using it should be wearing a respirator to prevent the fine powder, inhaling the fine powders. But it doesn't have the same toxicity to humans who are handling it, meaning contact with skin. And with the disposal of those mordants, the difference with you can reuse them is one, you can reuse your mordants and recharge them. Um, and they don't have the same risks to aquatic life that some of the other mordants that I mentioned before do. That's a really important thing to think about when you're either doing a natural dye practice in your own studio or working with, a production house that's using natural dyes. The first question is like, what mordant are you using?
Yeah, yeah,
With mordants, I think the other question is if, you have the threat to human and aquatic life. But mordants are also really important to get right for the natural dye that you're using, because if you're not using the right mordant for the fiber and dye combination that you're working with, you could end up with a product that is not light or color fast, which means that the chromophores are broken down really easily, either by UV or some combination of laundering from the water or detergents in the water. So, mordants are kind of this sticky subject because they bring this bad rep to natural dyes because there are very toxic mordants that I wouldn't recommend working with. But they also, if not used properly, mean that the natural dyes don't perform well.
right. And so then people think they're not color fast and that they can't get consistent color.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so in that question, you do a lot of indigo dyeing, right?
Yeah.
So how is that mordanted? Is that, and there's chemicals usually, it's like a urea process.
It's one of the ways you can process indigo.
Okay. And so what do you guys use? What do you do? Talk to me a bit about indigo.
We have a couple different indigo vat recipes that we use. This is kind of like with the mordants, is there's a lot of different ways you can process indigo, and some of them are more within the synthetic material realm than others. And there's a lot of synthesized indigo out there as well. So, when you buy a pair of denim, it was probably dyed with indigo, but it was synthesized indigo.
What is the difference between that? What does that mean?
This is where like me having a chemistry major would really help. I
Right.
don't know if I'm not able to speak, holistically on how indigo was synthesized, but or like the differences chemically, like between natural indigo and synthetic indigo and how they make it. That is one area I'm not an expert in. But in terms of vat type, let's say we're just talking about natural indigo, which is an indigo powder that is processed from the indigo plant, which can be fermented using a variety of techniques that I'm also not an expert in. But the plant is harvested in a leafy green state, and it goes through a reduction and fermentation that in some for some people that's a 12-month process. For other places around the world have learned or developed ways to speed up that fermentation process. But the leafy plant is fermented and you get like a blue powder. So we're working with a blue powder, but it's not like we mordant something and then you put blue powder in water and you dye it. It's very different from all of the other dyes we work with, because indigo doesn't need a mordant, but it does need reduction agents. So what that means is you can have a variety of different indigo vat recipes. The ones we use are the iron vat, which means that we're reducing indigo with iron. And there's the sugar vat, which is reducing the indigo with sugars. In this case, we're using like a corn sugar. And we use those. There's a lot of other vats too. There's the I think what they call the fermentation vat. There's a henna vat. I haven't actually used either of those. We use the iron and sugar vats in our production. The iron vat is really great for cellulose fibers, and we have chosen that vat because it's a good vat for production. Some people call it the workhorse vat. It's
Sure.
easier to keep balanced.
Okay.
It's easier to get darker colors out of that particular vat recipe. And the sugar vat, we primarily are using for protein fibers. And that's because the alkalinity of that fat, it's not quite as alkaline as the iron vat. It allows a protein fiber is easier to break down in an alkaline solution. And so I have never disintegrated anything in indigo, but I early days for Green Matters, I did hear a story about someone who had like a silk charmeuse, and the dye partner that they were working with used the iron vat to dye this protein fiber, and they wanted a really dark color. And so after 10 dips in the indigo vat to get a navy blue, the alkaline solution had broken down
Oh,
so
okay.
much that it was just threads. It had almost disintegrated
Oh, oh
protein.
no.
So
Okay.
that's kind of the chemical difference between the two vats that we use, is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one is gentle enough to dye protein fibers. I find
Okay.
it a
Okay.
little harder to get a deep blue in that solution. And sometimes what we might do is if we have, let's say we're dyeing yarn and we need to get a really dark blue, we might do 5 dips in the gentle sugar vat and then a last dip or two in the iron vat, because it can take
Okay, so you
a little
can
bit.
combine them.
It's not. I usually say, like, at one of our workshops, if we host workshops here at Green Matters, and if somebody's like, I have this, an example was somebody had a cashmere sweater and they wanted it a deep blue, and so I said, why don't you try doing a good base, let's say 5 dips in the sugar vat, and then your last two in the iron vat, which will help it get a little bit darker without exposing it to that much alkalinity for that amount of
Right.
time.
Right,
So there's
right.
your little pro tip for anyone who's trying
Yeah,
to dye
yeah.
wool yarn a dark blue without destroying it.
And do you dry completely between dips?
We don't, and that's, because of the way the volume that we need to be dyeing in a given production day, we don't do that. But I have read about different artisans doing that for different reasons, depending on the application. Like, I think with the clay paste resist, if you're doing a resist technique, I think that requires you to let it dry in between steps, which makes it a lot more labor intensive.
Hey everyone, it's Bridget, the Sustainable Quilter. I wanted to let you know about the Green Stitchers Hive. It's our brand new online community. It's a welcoming space where we can connect, share knowledge and resources, and support each other in our journey towards sustainable textile practices, whatever that means to you: quilting, weaving, knitting, felting, anything. Inside the Hive, we have workshops, monthly challenges, live Q&A sessions, live lectures with guest speakers, and opportunities to connect with other like-minded people. You can access the Green Stitchers Hive on my website at bridgetoflaherty.com. Can't wait to see you there. Okay, so that's all fascinating. There's 1,000 questions that I want to go in there, but I want to come back more to talk about your business and some of the core values that you have in your business and what you're doing there today. Tell me about that.
You're catching me at a really interesting time for this because I think in the past year I've rethought, not really rethought our mission, but maybe I should say revisited the reasons I started this company. And I think after running it for 8 years, that I feel a little more complicated about how we are trying to solve the problem of the pollution that's generated by the fashion industry. And starting the business and the first few years, my goal was to get as much volume as we possibly could out of our dye house, which is usually, working with businesses. So we have garment dye machines. And what that means is that it's a large vessel that has a wheel in it that looks like a mill wheel. We fill that with water, which becomes the dye bath, and we pack the garments into that, and the mill wheel turns it and agitates it so that we get a solid color. That's all of our dyes that are not indigo. We do process indigo by hand, but we got our first three of those machines in 2017 and have grown our fleet since then. And during the time of growing our machine operated business, the goal was biggest client we can find, as many units as possible, and that's having a big impact. If we're dyeing as much natural dyed garments as possible, that's a big impact. And something that has, I've been holding in my heart over the past maybe 2 years is it's occurred to me that is that contributing to the problem? Is producing as much as that's the problem, isn't it? That we're producing as much
Right,
as possible and we need to slow it down.
right,
And I've had to think about what does that mean about the impact we can have and how we have a sustainable business. You can have as dreams about how you want to change the world with your business, but at the end of the day, you still got to pay bills to keep the lights on, pay your rent, payroll, and all those things. And so, how do we fulfill our vision of slowing fashion down and being a part of a slower fashion industry while supporting the small businesses who need to sell clothes to stay alive, while ensuring that we are generating the revenue to stay alive? And these two things feel a little bit antithetical sometimes. That, of course, I want my clients to be producing as much as possible because it means that they're sending things my way, but they might be overproducing and adding to the problem that I'm trying to solve.
right, right.
And that's complicated. And it's
It is
also
complicated.
something to think about is if we're working with really large clients, while it might be a large project to us, it might be a very small fraction of what they produce, and they might use what we're doing as a marketing ploy. So I'm like, wait a
Right.
minute, I'm a part of
You
greenwashing.
don't want to be a part of greenwashing. That's not your goal.
So it's really complicated. This started to really occur to me in the past 2 years. And during that time, we were getting a lot of requests for projects that we considered at the time too small for us. And so either that is an individual who says, I have this garment, and if it was dyed again, it would be more valuable to me. And I'm saying, I don't have time for your one garment. I want you to meet our minimum order quantity, which is, if you're not familiar, a minimum number of whatever product you produce or process from a factory that says we won't process an order unless you hit this number. So at a sewing factory, it might be you got to produce 20 of each size of each style or whatever. For us, it was you have to dye 50 pounds of each color that you're ordering from us. And for smaller businesses, that's very limiting. For a new brand, that's really difficult. So what I was seeing is we have these smaller brands who are innovating way more than the bigger brands, but aren't able to work with us because we have a minimum order quantity and maybe they aren't able to meet it. And we have people in our community who want to have less of an impact on the environment without buying new clothes. And that was when we started to think more about, should we change our minimum order quantity to serve the people who are having more, the brands that are having more of an impact? And should we open up our service to be available to people who are not businesses? because I think individuals should have the power to make sure they have less impact. We shouldn't be at the mercy of corporations determining how much impact the clothing we buy has. And so that was when we changed our business structure a little bit to not just be business facing, also consumer facing. And I also had to consider, what does it mean for an individual to be empowered in keeping their garments out of a landfill? And I think in one way it's having services, and I think this goes beyond dyeing, to maintain and repair their clothing. So that's, you have a hole, somewhere that you can send to get it patched or stitched. You have a faded garment or a garment that's not a color that you appreciate, you have a service to have that color changed, and the wide variety of ways that we can keep garments out of landfills. And that was the beginning of our community indigo vat service, which is using the indigo vat to be a service for individuals. So you could send one garment and we process it just like we would one of our a client sending us 50 of the same garment. The other way that we've thought would, or hoping helps individuals, is we've started offering workshops. And this is a space not only to learn more about natural dye, but to utilize a production space to dye your own clothes. And that's another way that we're hoping that individuals can have more power, because they can just come and do the dyeing themselves. And so that usually means they're getting more than they would if they hired us to dye the one jacket, because they could do up to 5 pounds of things from home to dye. But connecting people with their clothing, with the stories of their clothing, and keeping that clothing in their wardrobe longer, might, to me, it could have more impact than just encouraging more production of garments that are ultimately ending up in landfills, or that are being overproduced and not sold. It's exciting, but we're having, not that we're having trouble, but it's new, and people aren't thinking about garments like that. We've been trained to think about our garments like you need a new one every 3 months.
Right, right. Or just get rid of it, and if it's got a hole or if it's looking faded, give that to a reuse center and go get your new thing.
Exactly.
That's kind of what we've been trained to do over the last number of years. Yeah.
Yeah. And not, there hasn't been a lot of thought around like what it's like wish cycling, right? You give it to Goodwill or you it ends up in the trash can and it just disappears from you. But we don't have there hasn't been a lot of bandwidth for actually talking about what does happen when you get rid of a garment. And donating isn't what we've been led to believe it is. A lot of items that are donated are not in a saleable condition. And it's like putting your dirty pizza box in the recycling. Like you're putting it there and you feel good about it, but maybe deep down it's not actually going to be recycled.
It's just going in the garbage. It's going into landfill. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
changing the way people think about like, donating, and they just think about end of life, even if it means that you have a garment that isn't going to be repaired, understanding what to do with it and having the resources to do something with it, and knowing this is a 100% cotton garment and it can be sent to a textile recycling center to be shredded into insulation or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a relearning for all of us culturally to figure that stuff out. And it's a long game. It's not something that's going to turn around tomorrow and be like, "Oh, everybody's doing this now."
Yeah.
It's a long game.
Yeah.
But hopeful. It's also hopeful. It's exciting. And I think having these conversations really helps to get that word out and get those thoughts kind of moving around for people. It's like, oh, maybe I could think differently about this. And then finding resources to be able to do that. Um,
Yeah. I think
eh,
you're right. It is a long game.
it's a long game. So tell me a bit about your actual, so the concept around women in trades for you. Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, I think that I was in part raised by my great grandmother. When was raised by a single mom, and she left me with granny most days, and she taught me how to sew. She was a seamstress her whole life and was forced out of her job, or forced into retirement when her factory closed and moved overseas.
Okay.
And when you think about, like, this was somebody whose husband fought in World War II, and her first job was when women were entering the job market more than they had before, during wartime, and then after, more women were in the workforce than there had been before, and that she supported her family and supported herself with a skilled trade job, which was being a seamstress here within 15 miles of where my business operates. And
Well, sorry, just pause on that. I want to come back to your grandmother and talk about the other stuff as well. But in where you are in Pennsylvania, like in Lancaster, that's big quilt country, right? Like that, there's a huge textile world down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
there is, yeah, across the street from us, there's a place that hosts where you can go see the Amish women quilting a couple times a week. It's pretty cool. Yeah, but there's a big a big sewing culture here generally.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
So carry on. Tell me more about your grandmother.
but just the idea that there were a variety of skilled labor jobs, blue collar jobs that provided enough to support a family, or support a woman who's trying to earn money for her family, and that those are for that particular trade, and for a lot of garment manufacturing is gone now. And for me, especially considering how few women work in manufacturing, it's always been important to find a way to recreate that work culture for women here in Pennsylvania. And a couple last year, we worked on a project with Stitch Fix, and they had bought a factory near us, and they don't own it anymore. But with us, they produced a collection of men's and women's t-shirts, knit t-shirts that were knitted here in Pennsylvania, cut and sewn here in Pennsylvania, dyed by us here in Pennsylvania, and then sent back to a warehouse where it was distributed in PA. And to me, that was the first like sign that these jobs were coming back to America, that there was a possibility of rebuilding the manufacturing jobs that used to be here in America, that were providing for people that lived in rural communities. And I think while we're really small, I mean, right now we're four people here at Green Matters, and that I'm not employing the whole community, but it's really important to me that we have jobs that are, good for women, that are not necessarily just women, but I'm trying to close that gap between the amount of men and women that work in manufacturing in America.
I think
But
it's okay for us to focus on bolstering women. I think it's okay.
right, yeah, it is okay.
You're okay. It's okay to say that this is really trying to bolster women in their fields. I think that's okay to say that.
It is okay. We need to be more comfortable saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have to
But
apologize for not being inclusive.
I think the short answer to your story after explaining all of that is that I was raised by someone who benefited from a healthy community within a skilled labor market. And that's something that I want to bring back, and that I want to be around for my great grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's awesome. I think that, yeah, like coming back to that narrative of focusing on women, I think it's that we don't have to apologize around that. I don't think that we need to do it in an exclusive way where we're saying men are not allowed, but really just saying, I want to really help women who need help. And I want to make that be something, give them access to a career and a skill that they may not have had access to otherwise. And I think that that's okay to focus on that kind of stuff. Um, and yeah, you were raised by a woman who had to work and had to get you there. So, and you had a grandmother who had to work and had to get you there. So, and you're doing the job now. So I see I think that's a really positive set of links that are moving you forward in your business. And the fact that you've grown from you to four people in 8 years is also huge, right? Like your business is growing. Takes a while. You are busting barriers. You're laying down new paths for an industry that hasn't had access to that before. And it's not an easy path that you've chosen. So it's the growth that you've had is already good, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Thank you. I I mean, and just in terms of like the type of jobs that we're creating, I think that when you think about where our economy is today, which is really weird. It's really weird. I don't know what's going on in Canada, but things are weird down here. Um, Especially with like student debt and how our society is kind of coming to terms with what do we need college education for? I think starting to think about how are we going to make jobs that don't require college education? Obviously, I'm college educated, but I went to Parsons and I know how to sew because I got a degree in fashion design. But being a seamstress is not something that you need to go into debt to be able to do. And I think thinking about domestic jobs across industries that don't require a degree is something that would really help local economies and help support local
Right.
workforce.
Well, and that they don't require a degree to still be valuable in terms of labor force and the salary that one might get shouldn't be based on how much education you have. It should be based on your skills. And you should still be able to earn a living and have a good living wage and not have it be considered menial labor.
Right.
I
Right,
always,
right,
yeah, just because you don't have a degree behind our world requires textiles. It our world requires textiles for everything. And why we consider it menial labor to produce, I don't understand. One of my kids, we had a conversation about the idea around fast fashion and the fact that these cheap clothes are really banking on cheap labor and cheap materials. And why are we paying less for that than paying more for the things that are actually healthy and good for us?
right,
Why
right,
why are we doing that? Why are we not overcharging for the things that are made poorly and damaging?
right, right.
And I thought that was a really interesting conversation. I'm like, oh, you're totally right. We should be having like a fee on crap material because it's crap and it's not going to last long. Why are we allowed to have that be cheaper and less easier, more accessible? And why are we not having the things that are good for us more accessible?
I think it could be something we see in our lifetime. I'm not necessarily advocating for a specific policy change, but we are getting closer to a time where we won't be able to afford mindless carbon emission. And there could be a time where there's regulation that says if a product, whether it's textiles or within the fashion industry or not, if a product has a certain amount of impact on the environment, it comes with a tax because we have to account for the damage that it was going to need cleaned up. And
That's
I'm
right.
not, again, not advocating for any particular policy, but
I am.
well, but you
I
see what I'm
am.
talking
Let's,
about. This
yeah.
could be in our lifetimes that there
Yeah.
actually is a cost associated with a product that has to travel to 7 countries to be manufactured.
And there
Or
should be, because there is a cost to those individuals who actually made the product in the first place and the environment that it's impacting. Those are costs that come with fast fashion production
yeah,
that we
and
don't
I
account for.
I think that this is based on a conversation that I overheard during a dinner when I was having this kind of like moment of like, what is fashion? I can't believe it's not as glamorous as I thought. Where somebody who has very different opinions than I do, back to back in a conversation over dinner, they first started talking about expensive denim. $250 jeans. Why are they so expensive? They're just a pair of pants. And going on this rant about expensive clothing and not understanding why somebody would pay that much for something expensive. Followed by completely different subject, which was why aren't things made in America? We need more jobs. There's not enough jobs.
Right.
And
Interesting.
had no concept of the two actually being very connected, that an
Right.
expensive pair of jeans might be expensive because it was made by somebody maybe in your community or within a community like yours
Who
who
was
was
paid
paid well.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a disconnect in these two things that we're not thinking about cost aligning with. Maybe this is expensive because it aligns with my values.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
a big thinking switch that we're going to have to make as a society
I think so
to
too.
make it to see a difference in the impact that textiles and fashion has.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the more conversations we have like this, the more people start to digest that and, maybe those little ripples will start to happen.
Oh, I feel like people who are seeking out a podcast called Threads of Sustainability are probably not the people who need to hear it most, but I hope they can spread the word.
Yeah, well, and they can maybe encourage other people to come and listen to our podcast episode and learn something from what they're doing. Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about how people might be able to find you and if they're if they're in the area, able to participate in your community vats and your workshops, and even just to be able to look up some of the stuff that you're doing.
Well, we're in Lancaster. If you find us here, we have workshops a couple a month. We also have open studio, which is like a non-instructional time just to come use the indigo vat and
Oh,
our
cool.
steam pot and things like that.
Nice.
But that does require you to be local.
Yeah.
One way to keep up with us is we're pretty active on Instagram.
Yep.
We do a lot of videos that just show our day to day in the dye house, which it is completely ridiculous. It's like watching a circus, but
I love
uh,
it. That's how I found you. I love it.
right, right. So that if you want to stay connected with us, we talk a lot about our process, both on the smaller scale as well as our commercial projects on our Instagram, and
What's your
that's all.
handle?
Oh, that's yeah, that would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Our handle is Green Matters Natural Dye Co. on
Okay.
Instagram.
And we'll put
Um,
that into the show notes as well so people can click on it. But yeah,
Wonderful. Thank
yeah.
you. We also have a newsletter.
Oh,
I do
nice.
a monthly newsletter, which is just announcing our workshops, but it's also turned into my soapbox for like the issue that I have discovered that month or that I'm thinking about that month. Last month I talked a bit about slow fashion and what it meant and all of the different varieties of slow fashion. And a couple months before that, I talked about killing your lawn, which really doesn't have much to do with natural dye, but it could if the pollinators that you're planting instead of a lawn are dye plants. So that's one way to stay in touch. And if you want to hear whatever, yeah, I'm thinking about carbon recapturing through old
And
growth trees.
is that through your website?
You can sign up through our website.
And what's your website address?
We are greenmattersnaturaldyecompany.com.
Perfect. Perfect. So I'll put that all into the show notes. I want to thank you for this. I had a whole bunch of other things that I wanted to talk to you about, but we're out of time. We'll have to have another connection again at another time and we can talk more because I think what you're doing is great. What I would really love to do is come down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania and visit you and get a tour of your dye house. That would
We
be
would
super
love
cool.
that. We would love
Awesome.
that. Yeah, it's a fun place to visit. There's a lot going on, and it's a cool area. We're right in the middle of Amish country, so
Nice.
there's
Yeah.
stuff
Well,
to do around here.
I might have to make a trip down there. It's not too far from me. It's not too far. So
Wonderful.
anyway, thank you for this. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Wasn't that just such an awesome conversation? I can't wait to talk with Winona again because I will definitely connect with her again. I want to know some of the new things that they're going to be introducing into their production, into their work that they're doing. I think it's so important that we're starting to see businesses really taking this kind of huge pivot away from the commercialization, but we're still dealing with production. So it's allowing people to have options around production that can be sustainable options so that we can have sustainable businesses still because it's a really important part, right? As creatives and designers and makers, we need to have options because we want to be able to put the beautiful things and amazing things that we are doing out into the world. But we also want to do that with options that are um, benefiting not only ourselves and the people within our communities, but the planet as well, the environment that these things are being made in. So I think it's fantastic that we're starting to see dye houses like this popping up, and also that they're starting to really expand to more of the individual, where we can start taking a look at our clothing in a more circular way so that we're not just looking to discard and hope that somebody will upcycle it in some way, shape, or form, that we can just have our wardrobes actually last a long time and have quality products out there. I think it's a super cool initiative that they're working on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk to you again next time. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to Threads of Sustainability. I really appreciate all the support that I've received over the last year. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can go over to my website and you can buy me a cuppa, and that helps keep the lights on here. You can also follow, and share the podcast with people that you know that might be interested. If you're interested in joining a community where we talk about all the different kinds of things around sustainability and share projects and share our journeys with each other, you can join the Green Stitchers Hive. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You can send me an email. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about the podcast. Have a great day.